Today is Saturday, September 28th, 2024. Today I'm going to talk about the egg donor matching process, specifically fresh egg donors, and the process of matching with one. What happens before you match, when you match, and after you match. All of this is part of the screening process an egg donor does right up front, what criteria you define to pick your egg donor, and the medical screening the clinic does after you match. There are things an egg donor bank will do beforehand to screen egg donors before making them available for you to review. And then once you find a match, there are a lot of other things that happen to confirm that match, such as medical screening by your fertility clinic. And in between these two things is a messy gray area where, through the egg donor bank, you confirm whether you'll move forward with this person. So a match isn't really a match until the whole process is complete. In the short run, she's a potential match, and you're executing the process to confirm she will be your egg donor. It's like buying a house. Your offer is accepted, and it's legally binding, but there are other things that can happen to make the deal fall apart. And while we're on the subject of legal contracts, you will likely pay your lawyer and her lawyer to draft a legal contract spelling out the agreement you're entering into with the egg donor. But let's go back to the very beginning. I mentioned in a prior episode that there are three sources of fresh egg donors: your fertility clinic, your surrogacy agency, and an external egg bank. All operate fairly similarly. They screen women using FDA and ASRM guidelines, that's the Food and Drug Administration, and the American Society of Reproductive Medicine, respectively. And those who pass are allowed to create profiles on their websites, which intended parents look at and scrutinize before deciding which one they want. These all work differently in that they collect additional descriptive information they think is useful for you to decide. This includes a lot of personal questions, medical history, reasons for wanting to donate eggs, etc., and pictures of them as a baby, a child, and adult. And if you're lucky, a video of the woman introducing herself. To my surprise, many of these look almost like dating profiles. I mean, instead of getting into deep topics, they focus on things like hobbies. I found that the videos make a huge difference. I was sold on a top pick because of her video, which was unbelievable, and I felt like I knew her. By the same token, a video can do the opposite. I found one woman who looked great on paper, but in her video came across as disingenuous due to a lot of discrepancies between what she wrote and what she said. Every egg donor bank has its own list of things it does with egg donors to conduct initial screening. There's a long questionnaire potential donors fill out, and some tiny number, like only 10% of them, actually qualify to become egg donors. AMH level, which is a measure of fertility, is another thing the egg donor bank may screen for. One clinic I know excludes women with an AMH level below 2.0. AMH stands for anti-Müllerian hormone, a hormone that plays a role in reproductive health. Timing is a bit messy for some of these items. I know I broke them into three buckets: initial screening by the egg donor bank, the messy stuff you figure out when you identify a potential egg donor, and then medical screening. But egg donor banks are not consistent in what they do up front. For example, most do genetic testing up front so that you don't pick someone who carries a genetic abnormality that you do. But I know of at least one that does this after you match, which means you're paying for medical screening and travel, and she may not even be genetically compatible with you. This particular issue can get very complicated. Why? Because there isn't a single genetic test that everyone takes. There are multiple genetic testing companies with multiple panels of tests. Most test for somewhere around 250 genetic abnormalities. But here's what happened to me. My clinic uses Myriad and a test called Foresight Carrier. Well, in the process of identifying 5 to 6 potential donors, I learned that each carried at least one condition that wasn't on my report, which led me to believe I wasn't tested for it and should get tested. So I had to go back to my fertility clinic and have them get this question answered. And there were three possible answers. One, I was actually tested for it, but the company calls it something else, which is why I couldn't find it on my report. Two, I wasn't tested for it, but they can easily add it to my panel. And three, they don't test for it, so I have to find another company that does. This third category is a huge pain. Since my clinic wasn't helping me with this, I had to research on my own other companies on the internet that test for the condition, and then find which tests of theirs cover this, and then determine which to take, given that I didn't want to completely overlap all the conditions I was already tested for. Instead, I wanted to maximize coverage by choosing a test that also covered other conditions I wasn't tested for. I went down this path to find it was going to cost me $500 for another test after I'd already paid $250 for the first one. Long story short, now I understand why the egg bank I'm working with doesn't do genetic testing up front. It creates the problem I just described. And even though it seems backwards, the chances of me personally being a carrier for a condition with another egg donor are slim to none, since I tested positive for just one condition. Finding your match is up to you. I identified some baseline criteria, but actually didn't find a lot of women who met them. I had at most 5 to 6 on my short list when I was looking at multiple egg banks. What I found was that the quantity and quality of donors can vary considerably from one bank to another. When push came to shove, it was more than how they looked on paper. I wanted to see how they moved and what they sounded like, which is why I really wanted videos. You may start out with one set of criteria and, after looking, tweak that a bit, but that's fine. I also decided to stop looking across multiple egg donor banks as that was too complicated. I narrowed it down to one, believing they had the best selection and process, and that is where I find my donor. Once you find your match, each egg donor bank will have a process for connecting you with your potential egg donor. In some cases, it's a one-way match, meaning the egg donor doesn't really care to know anything about you. On the other extreme is a mutual match, where they want her to know about you so that she's choosing you the same way you are choosing her. This certainly makes sense if it's a disclosed donation, because that means she's open to communication down the road. And if you don't click as people, she probably doesn't want your children finding her when they're old enough to start searching for their biological mother. I have heard of situations where the intended parents actually wanted to meet and did meet with the egg donor. That's a bit extreme, and I think applies more logically to matching with a surrogate because you work with that woman for at least 9 months. The 5th donor I selected had a video so well done that I didn't even need a Zoom call with her, and she also agreed to that, even though she knew very little about me. An aside here is that most egg donor banks don't have intended parents set up a profile, but the one I'm working with did offer me that option. So I put together a video introducing myself. It was very freeform, no canned set of questions to respond to or topics to cover, and it gave me a chance to sell myself to her. But she never saw it because in this messy gray area of matching, she decided that she wouldn't travel to my clinic in Texas because of the abortion restrictions, something I hadn't planned for and something most egg banks don't really ask. But in this day and age, you have to respect people's values and how those play out in terms of what they will and will not do as part of this journey. Once your match is confirmed, meaning you have both agreed to move forward, the heavy-duty screening happens. This primarily includes medical screening and may not include psychological screening, a background check, and genetic testing based on whether these were already done or not. Medical screening is the biggest process that happens after you match. And since I haven't gone through it yet, I don't have a lot to offer at this point. But it's based on the clinic you've chosen that conducts a medical evaluation of the egg donor. Their goal is to determine if she's a suitable egg donor, meaning are there any medical reasons why they wouldn't advise moving forward with her. This is something the egg bank doesn't do up front because it's specific to your clinic and each has its own criteria. I think this is also the most expensive piece of the screening. My egg donor bank estimates $5,700 for this, plus an estimated $4,000 to $5,000 in travel. So we're talking about $10,000 to $11,000 for this process, in addition to whatever coordination fee you're paying the egg donor bank. Rough ballpark here is up to $20,000 for the egg donor alone. At this price point, you don't want your donor to fail the screening because then you have to pay most or all of these costs again if you have to find a new egg donor, which is why I believe it's best to have as much of this done as possible upfront before you potentially pay $10,000 for the screening part after the match. Going back to the genetic screening, imagine spending $10,000 on this process and your egg donor passes the medical screening but turns out to carry the same genetic abnormality that you do. You're stuck. It's not advisable to move forward with her, but if you had known this up front, you would never have selected her in the first place. So in sum, egg donors are screened by egg donor banks up front before they're presented to you. You search through profiles to find a match. That match has to be verified with the egg donor who has to agree to move forward with you. And then the medical screening happens after that, which is where you spend a good deal of money, paid both to the egg donor bank and your fertility clinic to confirm she's medically clear to create eggs for you. I know this sounds long and complicated, and it is, which is why earlier in my journey I decided to switch to the frozen egg option, but that has its own complications, and maybe I'll explain those in another episode. I matched again with a new donor 2 days ago. I had my eye on 3 other donors and was waiting for videos, but this new one appeared, and I chose her almost immediately, primarily because she checked almost all of the boxes. No video, but instead, she has donated 3 times before and produced over 20 eggs each time. This is monumental to me because most of these women are first-time donors, which means regardless of how well they pass the screening, you have no idea how many eggs they'll produce, 5 or 25. I need 12 to meet my goals, so finding someone who has a history of producing a lot of eggs is great. Wish me luck. In the process, I discovered an artificial intelligence app called Future Baby Generator that you supply photos to of the mother and father, and it generates pictures of your baby. Teenagers as well. It's amazing. I've done this with 10 different women, including my most recent match. I'll include some photos of these potential children at the end of this episode. And again, thanks for watching.